Merfolk kind of become pretty standard in that it's a mono 2-drop Lord deck. He is actually still playing 3 standstill in the deck, which is not complete. I think you don't see in every list. And he has 2 dismembers. Outside of that, you know, basically what you'd expect with Phantasmal Images, Lord of Atlantis, Master of the Pearl Tridents.
Yeah, I actually know Chris Morris lent CBSML to his friends on the right, and I talked to him about his deck earlier, and he's playing a lot of one-ofs in his sideboard, kind of just leverage a lot of, you know, like a lot of small variants, like edges you can get there. He's got 1 Lawan, he's got 1 Kira, 1 Jite, 1 Soar, but the main
one
deck,
Divert.
1 Divert, a lot of crazy stuff. But in the main deck, you wanted to just keep it very focused, very straightforward, and you could just do what Merfolk did every round. And then out of the sideboard, you can bring in one-ofs to kind of tweak your matchups a little bit if you need to.
That's excellent.
And so I think one of the key cards here for Brendan Gould in the Death and Taxes deck is going to be the Stoneforge Mystic and Batterskull. Like, just Merfolk usually has a tough time dealing with Batterskull, and if that engine gets rolling, CML is going to be in a lot of trouble. The 2 dismembers, though, in his main deck will help out quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times the blue decks with Merfolk, not really a removal-heavy deck, is trying to do something just like be very powerful.
Absolutely, and of course, in addition to Batterskull, since he has Stoneforge Mystic, he's also playing 1 Jite. So Brendan Gould has a lot of tools that are really strong against Merfolk. He's got some removal in the form of Swords of Plowshares. He's got the Mangara of Koronor Caracas combo. All right, so there we go. Brendan Gould off the races with turn 1 Ijango Castle, Mother of Runes.
Right. So yeah, when we're looking at this, in this sense, it's almost like the blue deck has to become the aggro deck because Brendan Gould has access to so much more removal. Merfolk tends to be an aggro deck with a great combo matchup, which is kind of like the selling point of Merfolk.
Right.
Because this isn't actually a combo matchup and it's another creature deck, Chris is probably gonna have to try to. It's a little more of an uphill fight for him.
Right, and we can see one of the key cards in Chris's deck is Aether Vial, and we see no turn 1 Aether Vial from Chris, so he's going to start playing things on turn 2. He does have a Force in his hand, it looks like.
So we see a Judge's Familiar from Brendan Gould. That is a card from Return to Ravnica. 1/1 flyer sacrifices to counter a non-creature spell.
I think it's instant or sorcery.
Instant or sorcery.
So you cannot hit Planeswalkers.
Right, and Brendan does have the Aether Vial on turn 2.
Aether Vial is one of the key cards out of both of these decks, just because it creates essentially virtual mana. You pick it up every turn, you can tap it to put a creature with the amount of counters on it into play. And that's key for one of Brendan's most important cards, which is Mangara of Koronor. And you see it's so important here.
Chris is aware of this, you'd say.
So important that he decides to force it. Pitching...
Mirror Regery.
That's the F&M promo one for artwork, yeah. So, Aether Vial down. But still...
So how early would you say an Aether Vial is important? You know, like at what turn does an Aether Vial stop becoming a must counter card in this matchup?
I'd say probably about turn 3 or 4, but within the first 2 turns it is crucial, especially because one of Brendan's combos, and Chris plays Chris plays Master of the Pearl Trident. Master of the Pearl Trident. So Brendan's, one of his combos is if you get Mangara of Koronor and Caracas, you can tap it to exile target permanents, and then you can return it to your hand. And
it creates this this engine where you start having repeatable removal.
Right, and with Aether Vial you can do that every single turn because you can put it into play for free.
Yeah, so Brendan plays a turn on TPI. He misses his 3rd lander, but does get a Thalia out in play. Keeping in mind that with the Aganjo Castle he has, once he has another white mana, the Thalia, there's some synergy going on there. Thalia, not particularly strong in this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, it can slow down, forces or dazes a little bit, but other than that, not a ton going on there. And with Chris's hand...
he does have a force and a daze in his hand.
Right, he does have a force and a daze. You should note, a lot of you might not know what a Django Castle does. It's a weirdo Kamigawa land, but you can pay white and tap it to prevent the next 2 damage to a legendary creature, which is great for Thalia. Of course, with Mother of Runes on the table for Brendan, he's already got a lot of protection going on right there.
Right, creatures probably won't be dying on Brendan's side. Is it fair to say then that Chris is, somewhat of a racing situation?
So Chris plays a Mirror Regery, so his Merfolk are all now getting +2/+2, and each of the Lords is giving each other +1/+1. So those are both 3/3 creatures on Chris's side. Brendan gets in with his 1/1 Judge's Familiar to knock Chris down to 17, I think?
Yep, it puts down to 17, then Brendan follows up with a Mirren Crusader.
Mirren Crusader. The double striker, neither of the protections take into account this matchup. I mean, it's pro red.
The infect colors.
Pro the infect colors, so pro green and pro black. The double strike is simply pretty good sometimes against those Merfolk Lords.
Right. The double strike allows it to, so it has kind of this wall of at least 4 first strike power now, which will really probably help keep Chris at bay. Eventually, Chris's creatures are, going to keep becoming bigger, though.
Right. Of course, once again, the Mother of Runes on Brendan's side will allow him to send any creature through because unless Chris draws a Mutavault, all his stuff is blue. So you'll always be able to give your Mirren Crusader protection from blue, swing in for 4 points right there.
Chris, on the other hand, Chris has drawn Phantasmal Image for the turn. So because of that, he may be able to make a non-blue blocker if he needs to.
Right. So he's got a couple interesting options. He could copy his Marrow Reejerey and get an extra Merfolk Lord onto the table. He could copy the Mirran Crusader if he wanted. Maybe Mother of Runes if he wants to get past the white army.
Yeah.
Or I guess actually Phantasmal Image is Mother of Runes target creature you control?
Mother of Runes is a target creature you control.
Okay, so you cannot target your opponent's creatures with it.
Right. Otherwise, the image is rather weak here.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking about that for a second, but fortunately that doesn't seem to be the case.
Do you have a preferred play of those ones?
I think I would probably just copy my own Merfolk Reejerey here.
Yeah.
Like the Mother of Runes is tempting to get guys through, but I think I'd rather just build my guys up to be large enough to just attack through all of his creatures. It seems like we said, Chris is kind of the beatdown deck here. And we noticed Chris plays a Wasteland there. He could Wasteland away that Ajango Castle. That's one of the downsides of playing with those Kamigawa lands, is you can get Wastelanded.
Yeah, it's not actually a Plains. You normally play because it's a free roll to be a Plains. This is one of those situations where you can be punished for it. It seems to me like Chris doesn't actually have, he doesn't have a need for too many more lands, so he probably will see a Wasteland happening, I would imagine, on Ajango Castle.
Yeah, I think he'll do that right now just to keep Brendan off another mana. 3 mana is kind of a crucial choke point for his deck. He's got Mirran Crusader, he's got Flicker Wisp, he's got even Mind Sensor, he's got Mangara, and if he plays a 4th land, he could even have drawn as 1 GT or something terrible like that for Chris. So
a GT on Mirran Crusader is something that, or even on Thalia, something that Chris's deck is fairly cold to.
Yeah, GT is extraordinarily strong against creature-based decks, and Merfolk.
Especially with any creature-based decks, he has with double strikers, the card gets ridiculous.
Right, exactly. Now, Chris is gripping that Force of Will, and he can pay the 1 for Thalia if he needs to. So he does have an out to any really bad cards for him. But all right, and he does just that. So I think that Phantasmal Image is copying the Reejerey. Is that correct?
I believe so. Yeah. It sounds like Phantasmal Image is on there. It copied Mother of Runes.
So he did go to copy the Mother of Runes. So he's going to be able to send his guys through and also block efficiently.
He can block the Mirran Crusader. He can do Mother of Runes and give itself protection from white. Obviously not this turn. Actually, sorry, it doesn't want to give itself protection from white. That's terrible. It's an illusion.
Right.
So that's actually that play tells me that he wants to be racing, which is he believes that he can win this race.
The problem I see with that, and Chris has probably played Merfolk more than I have, but the problem I see is you want to build your Merfolk entire army up large so you can send in multiple guys at once. Sending in 1 guy a turn, I don't know if he's going to be able to win that race when there's Mirran Crusader on the other side.
Right, and Brendan has a lot of chump block options, so if he's only sending in, well, first of all, you can send 1 guy through, and that's only 3 damage, so I don't know. It seems like I agree with you, he needs to be attacking with his whole army.
So we see Brendan Rishadotting Port now in that island there, so Chris is going to have 1 less mana to play with. And it's worth noting that between the Judge's Familiar and the Thalia, that Force of Will is actually kind of a little hamstring. It's going to cost, he has to pay 1 more for it with the Thalia, even if he forces it out.
From the
and then he has to worry about the Judge's Familiar hitting it for 1.
Right. So Chris with the drawn Wasteland is going to be able to basically take all of Brendan's lands out of the game. That said, Chris's board still isn't really enough to he's far enough behind on the board that he still needs some help here.
Right, that simple combination of Mother of Runes with Mirran Crusader to get it protection through, 4 damage every turn against a creature deck like Chris's, it's still a lot of damage, and Chris doesn't have a lot more Merfolk action to follow it up with. We haven't seen him draw any more Merfolk Lords to just build his army up tall, and now that he uses the Phantasmal Image to copy the Mother of Runes...
Right, the Mother of Runes needed to count as a Lord.
Right, it really needed to count as a Lord. And it's not going to be able to do that. So Chris draws a Wasteland, I think, and he's probably going to waste away that Rishadon Port. Just debating his next sequence of plays, I think. Yep, and there goes the port.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no reason for Chris to have another land in play. So at this point, he just needs to keep Brendan off future spells and hopefully draw something that can stabilize him. That said, he doesn't have too many draws that do that.
And Brendan also just drew a Stoneforge Mystic here, so even if Chris manages to recover somehow, that's going to be a huge problem for Chris Morris-Lent.
The only removal spell that Chris Morris-Lent has is Dismember. Unfortunately, out of the mono blue deck, Mirran Crusader does have protection from black.
That's
rather amusing. His 1 removal spell actually isn't a removal spell.
And not only does Mirran Crusader have protection from black, but Chris is quickly dwindling life total. He's going to be at 8 after this attack, or no, he's going to be at 7 after this attack, I believe.
So Dismember's, not really a free spell at this point.
Right. I mean, it's 1 more turn, it will not even be castable. All right. So Chris needs some pretty good draw step action here. That's a Merfolk, I believe.
Yep, he has a second Master of the Pearl Tridents added to the board for Chris. he still doesn't have an answer to this Mother of Runes play. So, he's on a 2-turn clock.
Right. So there's the Master, and because of Mara Regery, he can tap target permanent or untap target permanent, and he'll tap the Thalia.
He's going to tap Thalia and just swing for the fences here.
Right, so those merfolk creatures are all 4/4s?
4/4s.
So he can attack for 8. Now just imagine if that
Mother
Phantasmal Image had copied a Merfolk Lord. Chris would have been in far better shape, I think. He could have crunched in for 15 points, I think?
Yes. They'd all be, he'd have 3 5/5s.
So the way the Merfolk deck works is it uses these cheap creatures to build up. They each give each other +1/+1 and another ability, so he's just building them up. And so these small 2-mana creatures can quickly become 5/5s.
I've often heard, I've heard the Merfolk deck compared to casting a pack rat sometimes, where it's like
every turn we're going to cast the same creature and they're all going to get bigger.
Yes, every turn you're going to cast a Lord. You're going to play just a bunch of iterations of the same creature.
And they all have extra effects too. So once again, the Regery, whenever you cast a Merfolk, it gets to tap or untap a permanent, and that's going to be huge against getting through Brendan's wall of creatures. So I think Brendan drew a land there. I'm not totally sure. I thought it might have been a port, but...
Yeah, it looks like he's still just playing with whatever's on the battlefield, but which I still think is probably enough as long as, he has to make sure that he has to use 2 creatures to push the Mirran Crusader through, but then he has 2 chump blockers left, which, depending on how many if Chris can draw Merfolk, should be enough to make good chump blocks here. If Chris draws a Merfolk, I think the tap off Regery will actually kill Brendan.
Right. So an interesting question if you're Brendan here is, do you attack with that Judge's Familiar? I don't think... Okay, so he's going to send in just the Judge's Familiar.
Right, he's going to send in just Judge's Familiar, putting Chris to 6, and it looks like next turn he's going to hope to make the, next turn make the lethal swing, and this turn maximize his blockers.
So he's going to play the Stoneforge Mystic, and now Chris has to make a decision. He can pitch the Force, which will force Brendan, if he so chooses, to sacrifice the Judge's Familiar.
Right.
So that would essentially remove one of the creatures from the table there.
Yeah, and because I think it's an interesting thing, 6 and 5 are basically the same life total for Chris. Actually, he can use Daze instead of Force, which is probably just better.
Oh, sure, he can just Daze it. Yep.
And he's gonna float the mana off.
And the mana to pay for the Thalia.
For the Thalia.
So, okay, so he does not allow Stoneforge to resolve, so he just chooses to... So, Chris dazes the Stoneforge, and Brendan opts to not sacrifice the
Brendan
Judge's
chooses
Familiar.
to have Judge's Familiar instead of Stoneforge Mystic.
I think I would have rather had the Mystic there.
I would agree. If Chris were at 5, I would have picked Judge's Familiar.
Right.
But because it's a flyer, but because he's at 6, I think the Stoneforge Mystic may have been a better play, just because of the fact that it would be untapped.
It's interesting. If I were Brendan, I probably would have attacked with the Mirran Crusader that turn, used the Mother of Runes, and left the other creatures back.
So on that line, so he'd have 2 creatures left in play. He'd get to cast Stoneforge Mystic. He'd only have 2 blockers left. He would be dead to a top deck Merfolk spell. But outside of that, he would then be, pretty much have won the game. That said, Chris did draw Merfolk spell. He's drawn Curse Catcher this turn.
Right.
Work with us either tonight, yesterday, or at a previous event.
Right.
We will need to have that information.
We're going to see Curse Catcher come down on the table here and probably tap down.
9 through 64 will be.
What do you think you target here? Because if you target the Mirran Crusader, it's probably just going to get targeted Mother of Runes on blue in response.
Right. I mean, you basically, I think no matter what you do, you're tapping Mother of Runes, no matter whether you are actually tapping it or not.
Sure.
What I might try to do is tap Thalia.
That's what I was thinking too. If you tap the Thalia, then if Brendan gives it protection, then the Mirran Crusader is susceptible to being killed off by one of the Merfolk if you block with it.
So and otherwise, if he lets that tap happen, then he's down a blocker unless he wants to block with Mother of Runes.
Right, exactly. Okay, so now Chris is trying to figure out how he wants to attack here, and he's kind of looking at that Phantasmal Image Mother of Runes, trying to figure out. All right, so he's going to make his Mara Regery protection from white, and attack in for 5.
Yeah, it has 2 lords in place, so that's for 5. He's making the minimal attack this turn.
Or sorry, for 4. My mistake, right?
Yeah.
For 4.
1, 2. Yeah. The image is not a lord. For 4, he's making a minimal attack this turn, I imagine, so that next turn he will presumably have a lethal attack. So he's doing kind of the same thing that Brendan was doing.
So now we'll see what Brendan chooses to do. He draws a land there.
Yeah.
So he's up to 3 mana, and here comes Flicker Wisp.
Right. So this is pretty good. It's just as something that removes a blocker.
Right. And
he can kill the image.
Right. If he targets the Phantasmal Image, because of the text on the image, when it's targeted, it dies. It'll go away, and Chris will no longer have that Mother of Runes. But no, Brendan opts to flicker out the Master
of the Pearl Trident.
Of the Pearl Trident.
Seems like Brendan believes this to be lethal. Is that correct? I mean, the way he still seems like he's 1 point short.
So, all right. So he does choose to destroy the Mother of Runes. Okay.
Right. So then he has basically a 2-turn clock. It would look like, something like swing Judge's Familiar, go, swing Mirror and Crusader, Judge's Familiar next.
Right. And he also has the Flicker Wisp, which is a 3/1 flyer there too.
Right.
So he's in a pretty good spot. Brendan attacks with the Judge's Familiar, dropping Chris down to 5. Chris needs a pretty good draw step here.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the best draw step he could have would be Spreading Seas, but that's not really an option.
Right, those Master of the Pearl Tridents give all of his creatures Island Walk. Not so strong against the mono white deck.
Exactly. I'm trying to think. I don't know if he actually is on a live draw here.
All right, and I think he drew a Mara Rejury.
It looks like another Rejury.
Yep. Certainly a really good draw. If there were going to be 2 more turns left in the game, that'd be one of the best cards you could draw. But
absolutely, I think in this matchup, it's one of his better cards.
Absolutely, because it gets your creatures through, and it causes Brendan to have second thoughts about attacking.
Exactly.
But with the case as is, Chris is going to be in a pretty rough spot. He can cast that Rejury, and he can tap one of Brendan's creatures, which will probably get saved by the Mother of Runes, but I don't think he'll be able to attack for enough. And he doesn't have any way to stop Brendan's attack on the next turn.
He would hope that, what he can do is he can play the Rejury and make a full-out attack. And if Brendan has to block with enough creatures that he doesn't have a lethal swing next turn, then that will work out. However, I don't think that's the case that he does.
Right. With that Mother of Runes giving his Mirror and Crusader protection, or his Flicker Wisp, or I guess, yeah, Mirror and Crusader protection.
That's 5 damage.
That's 5 damage, which is lethal. There's also the possibility, what Chris could try to do is bluff that he has an answer somewhere and make Brendan not attack with his Mirror Crusader, because if Brendan just attacks with Flicker Wisp and Judge's Familiar, that's not quite enough.
And he gives him another turn.
But I don't know what Chris could be playing for to draw. I mean,
sometimes you've seen. I think you could have an Unsummon possibly, or a Vapor Snag. I've seen that be played in some of these lists.
Sure. I mean, once again, he's got these 2 Dismembers, but sitting at 5 life at Dismember is not where you want to be.
Right, Dismember's not actually a card here.
Right, and because of the Thalia and Judge's Familiar, it's going to be pretty hard to cast it. All right, so Chris taps down the Thalia, like we talked about him potentially doing last turn, and I think we will see Brendan not activate Mother of Runes here. He's going to do the math to make sure that he's in good shape, because he knows Chris has kind of showed all he's got now. He just played his creature, tapped all of his mana, so now it's up to Brendan to properly do the math and make sure he doesn't die here.
Yeah, Brendan, and the thing is that because he's going to the last turn of the game next turn, Brendan can chump block with Mother of Runes and give his Mirror and Crusader protection from blue. That should ensure the 5 damage he needs to finish the game.
Absolutely. Looks like he's still thinking just to make sure that he's in good shape, but okay, so he is going to activate the, oh, no, starts to tap the Mother of Runes, takes it back. All right, and eventually Thalia is tapped.
Yep.
So, yep, he just lets it happen. And
that seems like the heads-up play.
Yep, that seems correct to me. It seems streets ahead to me. All right, so Chris is now looking at his creatures.
Yeah, but at this point, Brendan just has to block correctly.
Right, as long as Brendan blocks correctly is good. So if I'm Chris, I would just as quickly as possible attack with all my creatures and just hope Brendan makes a mistake. Sometimes if you're really fast like that, you can catch your opponent off guard, but Brendan just did all the math, and I think he'll be...
Yeah, I think Brendan knows that he's going to survive this attack.
Right, and yep, so Chris attacks with everything. That's one play.
All right, so we have 3 5/5s and a 1/1, so Brendan has to block 2 of the 5/5s.
The Chris Catcher is a...
oh, sorry, not a 1, a 4/4. So 5, so he has to block 3 of the creatures. Yeah, they're all 5/5s. Apologies, because yes, they're all 5/5s. Because
of the Mirror Rejury that was just played.
All the lords don't pump themselves. So he has
good old math.
a swing of 20. Brendan's going to have to make 3 blocks, but 3 blocks is just fine. As long as he gives his Mirror Crusader Pro Blue, he should be okay.
Right, and you can understand why Chris, just attacking quickly might have been able to give him some kind of solution, because we're all sitting here trying to figure out what size these creatures are, and lords are tricky to deal with.
Right, there's that thing, that for a second I thought Chris Catcher is a 1/1, then we'd look at it and like, wait, it's a 5/5. But I may have made incorrect blocks if that play was made very quickly.
Right. So Brendan's going to go into block like this, and he's almost assuredly going to give his Mirror Crusader protection from blue.
Well, actually, wait, the Rejury, hold on, actually, he doesn't have the lethal swing next turn then, unless he has a kill spell, because, oh no, sorry, he gave the Flicker Wisp protection from blue, so that puts Chris down to 1, but I don't know where the last damage is coming from, because the Rejury is there as a blocker.
Wait, what did I miss there? It seems like if you give the Mirror Crusader protection from blue, oh, but then the Mother of Runes dies.
Then the Mother of Runes does die. Okay, so, yeah, actually, sorry, Chris... A little bit off there, yeah. Chris Morris Lent actually steals the first game there.
Wow, looks like a really strong position for Brendan there. I wonder what would have happened if had he attacked with the Mirror Crusader on the turn prior.
On the previous turn? Yeah, then he would only need to keep Judge's Familiar alive in that situation.
So the short version is math is difficult.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to the sideboard games, let's take a look at what these guys have in their sideboards. So looking at the Death and Taxes deck, I see maybe Oblivion Ring as a card that could potentially come in here if he wants to try and keep Chris off of some of his lords. Gut Shot, maybe. He's got one Gut Shot he could potentially bring in to help deal with Curse Catcher, but I imagine those Curse Catchers are likely getting sideboarded out. And then, of course, one Umezawa's Jitte, which is quite crucial.
Which is definitely coming in. Yeah, out of those, the Oblivion Rings are pretty decent, and the Umezawa's Jitte. I think the only ones you actually want to be boarding in.
Yeah, the Jitte comes in. I'm looking at this deck list. He's got 2 Cataclysms in the sideboard, which makes me smile, but I don't think they're going to be right to bring in here. So I think we'll likely see 2 rings and the Jitte come in for Brendan, and probably taking out maybe Judge's Familiar. Not great in this matchup.
What Brendan has to do is he needs to, like, because of Chris's deck having all its creatures just continuing to grow in such a linear fashion. Brendan doesn't have like a true sweeper or something, so he's going to have to somewhat become the aggro deck. Once we get to that point where Chris has 5/5/5s, that's really more than Brendan can deal with. So the Judge's Familiar, Judge's Familiar isn't a very fast card. So my guess would be we'd see that boarded out.
Right, and there also just aren't a lot of good targets for it in Chris Moore's Lent deck.
Right. I
mean, there's a couple. You can get like a Dismember or Force potentially, but it's not going to be doing
enough. But a lot of times,
enough.
when Chris is playing those cards, oftentimes Chris has extra mana, kind of as we saw there in that game. After he starts dumping his lords,
right.
Chris was ending most turns with untapped islands.
And even Mind Sensor, another card that could come out. Speaking of Force of Will, do you think Chris will leave his Force of Wills in this matchup? We've seen a lot of beatdown players sideboard them out.
The thing is the only card it's a 2-for-1, which I really don't want in this aggro mirror. The only card I actually would want to Force of Will, like 2 for myself, would be Umezawa's Jitte. And so that, and because oftentimes that's going to be put into play with a Stoneforge Mystic even, so it's like Stoneforge Mystic and Jitte are the cards you'd want to force, and that's really it. No, I don't really want the card in here. There's a couple other cards I'm not too thrilled about. I don't really like Standstill in this matchup.
Right. So the way Standstill works, you want to play it when you have the advantage, but when you're in a beatdown matchup, it's suddenly really dangerous because you can't ever cast it if you start falling behind.
Right. So things that he does have that are good. So what Chris does have is he has a Jitte of his own. He has a Sower of Temptation. He doesn't have too much outside of that. His anti-creature things are things like Submerge. He could board, the only other card that really does anything is Echoing Truth, which isn't very good at all. So he may have to leave in some number of these spells. Force of Wills I think will probably be left in because they're better than Standstills.
Right. I mean, you're looking at some of the bounce spells, and it's like, well, those probably aren't better than a lot of stuff that's in his deck, right? And Chris, when I was talking to him earlier, just really wanted to keep his main deck as consistent as possible. So I imagine he's just going to, bring in a couple one-ofs that are good, the Sower, the Jitte, and then, leave everything else as is. He took the first game down via consistency.
Yeah. Actually, because of how the matchup played out, I'm not completely opposed to boarding in some Echoing Truth, even though I'm quite aware that they're not this matchup's not what they're intended for. I would really like to have a Vapor Snag in this matchup, anything that's a removal spell, even just for one turn, and the fact that it has the potential to bounce 2 things would make me consider boarding it in here.
I think the big question for me is, would you rather have Echoing Truth than Forcible in your hand a lot of the time? And it could go either way.
It actually could go either way, as odd as that sounds.
Right, I mean, there are turns where, forcing a turn 1 Vial could be huge. Forcing a problematic Mother of Runes or something could be huge. On the other hand, Echoing Truth to pick up that Vial is still a totally reasonable play, and you get the long game versatility of bouncing a Mirror Crusader. I think after turn 3, the Echoing Truth's the better card. But the question is that before turn 3, how bad? You have to kind of think of the things that Brendan might resolve because you don't have Force of Will. Right. You still do have Days, so there's definitely a trade-off. Yeah, and so I'm really surprised last game that Brendan didn't make it so Stoneforge Mystic would resolve, because if he had found that Jitte or Batterskull, he would have been in such good shape. So this game, perhaps we'll see the work that Jitte does if Brendan manages to draw one. But there will be 3 Jittes total, I believe, between the 2 deck lists. Yes, 2 in Brendan's and 1 in Chris's.
Yeah, no, Brendan has a virtual, with Stoneforge Mystic, he has a virtual 6 Jittes because he has a full set of Stoneforges, which gives him but yes, Chris does have 1 Miser Jitte in his sideboard.
So if you were playing a turn 2 Stoneforge Mystic in Brendan's deck, would you find Batterskull or Umezawa's Jitte?
Jitte.
You would find Jitte.
Yeah. The thing is about Batterskull is if Chris can get, those 5/5/5 boards, Batterskull won't win you the game. But what GT helps you do is stop that from ever happening in the first place. If you get a GT to kill the first Lord, it's very likely your GT will kill every subsequent Lord.
The other thing that Brendan may or may not know about Chris's deck, Chris is sporting those 2 Dismembers. So if you were to go find that Batterskull, you might just end up with a dead Stoneforge Mystic and this clunky 5-drop sitting in your hands.
Right.
So I think I would probably go for GTA there too. And
I think most people who play Stoneforge are heads up. In a creature mirror, GTA is typically the equipment of choice.
So Brendan has these 3 Phyrexian Revokers in his main deck. Do you think you would keep those, or would you take those out?
Well, so the cards they're live against in Chris Morris Lent's deck will be Wasteland, Ethervial. I mean, theoretically Curse Catcher, but that wouldn't happen.
And if you name Ethervial, it means you can't use yours if you play one
right,
of yours.
Right, and you also play 4 of them.
Right.
And you also play 4 Wastelands. So, no, I don't really like the Revoker.
I think, just based on how many cards Brendan has, I would be tempted to keep them in just because you have a 2-1 that can block. And also, it is crucial, I suppose, if they play the turn 1 Aethervial, that you and you don't have one, that you can shut theirs off. But that's another card that Brendan could potentially take a look at taking out here. But yeah, this is a pretty interesting matchup. Something that's neat about Legacy, you have all these high-powered cards. You have these combo decks that can kill you on turn 1.
Right.
We have a mirror match here sitting in round 8 of the tournaments, or not a mirror match, but an aggro mirror match in round 8 of the tournament of 2 beatdown decks.
Right, and especially what I like about Brendan Gould's deck is his beatdown deck isn't even particularly powerful. What I really find interesting about Death and Tax is, he's playing 2/1s for 2 in the main deck. Right,
you're playing Thalios, you're playing Phyrexian Revokers, Judge's Familiar. I mean, cards like that maybe people the core of a beatdown deck, you don't expect just this white weenie-ish deck to be the Legacy staple, but it is. So we're off to the races, and we have turn 1 Mother of Runes from Brendan.
Yeah, and we saw that card was pretty problematic for Chris last game, and we'd expect it to be again. And Chris is aware.
Yeah, Chris cannot play Island Dismember fast enough on that Mother of Runes. And Chris drops 16, but he's probably pretty happy about that exchange.
Well, if he lets it resolve, the Dismember's gone if he lets that ever that resolve.
So speaking of sideboard cards, we see Chris has Soar in his hand, which is certainly going to be good. But Brendan has his GT in his hand, which is going to be
the best
crucial.
card. Yeah.
Okay, so Brendan left in his Judge's Familiars, and there's a Judge's Familiar there. So in Brendan's hand, I see the GT. I think I see another land also.
Yeah, he's going to want to make sure to make his GT be daze proof when he casts it. It's
Absolutely.
So important to the matchup.
Right, yeah, getting that daze is completely brutal. So we might just see him cast that GT here and set up to equip
cast it on 3 lands.
Yeah, cast it with 3 lands and then set up to equip it the next turn onto that Judge's Familiar. And unless Chris has another removal spell,
and we see exactly that.
All right, so there's the GT. Chris does not have a Force or a Daze in his hand. His hand looks like 2 Mutavaults, Soar, Master of the Pearl Trent, Marrow Readery to me.
I would agree. Yep.
So Chris doesn't have much in the way of fighting off that GT. He draws Lord of Atlantis. So
yeah. Wait. Yep.
So Chris's hand is a bunch of Lords and Soar, which is certainly good.
I mean, that's what the deck does. He's actually missing his second blue source, which is pretty relevant right now, as all his Lords are blue to play.
Right. Oh well, he has the Readery, I believe, in his hand, which is 2.
So the Readery, okay.
2 blue.
Correct. The Readery's not, but I mean his Sower, Master of the Pearl Trident, and Lord of Atlantis are all double blue cards.
Right. So on Brendan's turn, I imagine we'll see him equip that GT. Something interesting though is Chris has 2 Mutavaults, which will really help him if they get into any kind of race. I mean, because those all get pumped up by those Lords.
Right. So what Brendan's going to try to do is, while there's only 1 Lord on the table, he's going to probably start immediately start GTing down the Lords.
Right. So he attacks here. So something interesting that could happen is if Brendan chooses to instantly GT that Marrow Readery, Chris could untap and Soar the Judge's Familiar, getting that Judge's Familiar away from Brendan. But I think if I were Brendan, I'd probably wait. Nope, he's going to do it right now.
Go ahead and do it right away.
Now, interesting, Brendan has 2 Rishian Ports in play, which can deal with those Mutavaults.
Right.
Brendan's card in his hand, though, or one of his 2 cards, is an Umezawa's GT, which isn't going to be able to do a lot with the GT he currently has in play.
His last card his last card's not a Master of the Pearl Trident, it's a Phantasmal Image.
It's a Phantasmal Image, interesting.
So that's actually castable here.
Right, he could cast it. Now notice Brendan, very wary of this, taps down Chris's only blue source. So Chris now just can't cast any of his spells.
Right, he can attack with Mutavault,
right,
and can't play another Mutavault.
He plays his 3rd Mutavault, and he's going to get in with one of those for 2, along with the Curse Catcher for 1 more. But that's only 3 points of damage.
Yeah, Chris behind in the race, and with an active GT on Brendan's side, Chris is in a pretty tough situation.
Now, once that GT connects one more time, he's going to be in a rough spot, especially because Brendan has... because Brendan has those 2 ports. I think Chris could have activated his Mutavault in his upkeep when it got tapped.
Oh yeah, and then he could have had 2 Mutavaults hitting that turn.
Is that what he did?
No, he played another Mutavault and activated it, so he did miss the chance at 2 more damage.
So he did miss the chance to activate there.
So Ether Vial for Brendan Goold. I don't think Brendan has another creature. I believe the last card in his hand is the second GTA.
Yeah, the last card in hand is the second GTA, but with 1 GTA active, that's going to be plenty.
It showcased the power of it that Brendan essentially kept a hand of 4 lands, Mother Runes, Judge's Familiar, GTA.
Right.
You know, and like, yeah, I don't know, that's a good enough hand to keep.
Right. We were talking about that in sideboarding, and that's going to be a huge, huge piece of this. So we see Chris taps with those lands. Do we know if he activated those Mutavaults with those lands or not? I guess we'll find out.
No, it doesn't. I don't.
No,
he's
didn't.
Still missing that line.
So he's
dropped,
just missing extra damage here.
He's dropped 4 damage at this point.
So
I don't think, sometimes people miss this because, like, I think Chris knows that this damage is not what the match is, not what this game is about. This game is all about the Umezawa's
Right,
GTA.
and also sometimes when something happens in your upkeep, it's just so early on that you're just not even thinking. It's like, yeah, okay, it just happens. Your lands get tapped,
Right.
Okay, so Brendan kills off the Mutavault with those Umezawa's GTA counters, and then attacks with his Judge's Familiar for 1 more and gets 2 more counters.
Second Ether Vial for Brendan Goold.
So once again, Brendan has nothing going on here except for that GTA, but that GTA alone is enough, because what's going to start happening is soon Chris won't be able to do anything, and not only will the GTA have killed off his creatures, but Brendan will be able to transition to beatdown mode and do 5 damage a turn by pulling those 2 counters off the GTA.
What could be interesting is, because Brendan doesn't have a second creature yet, there actually is a chance where Chris could dismember the Judge's Familiar, ready to draw it, and actually have a shot at getting in this.
Right. Of course, once Brendan gets Chris far enough behind, Brendan's deck is full of good creatures to play, and it's only a matter of time until he draws one.
Well, yeah. I mean, Chris can't reasonably expect that Brendan's gonna never draw another creature.
All right. So Brendan kills off the Curse Catcher with 1 of the counters, untaps, and Brendan's in a phenomenal position here now.
Well, 1 more hit from this Judge's Familiar, and it'll be out of dismember range as well, which I think will actually take away the last out Chris Morseland.
As long as Brendan doesn't cast that second GTA, he's gonna be in pretty good shape. Don't cast the second GTA, man. Don't do it. Whatever you do. Once I was watching a PT, someone cast 2 Katakas against Affinity. It was pretty brutal.
He pumped it once to deal 3 damage.
Okay, so he's not thinking about Dismember here. But
he hasn't seen one yet.
Oh, he saw one this game, actually, on the Mother
No, sorry,
Roots.
you're right, he did see one.
But he drew another creature, Athalia, so he's actually in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
And he just locks down Chris's lands twice more. Okay, I think Chris is pretty much toast at this point. I mean, he's got 2 Rishon ports, he's got a GTA active, and Chris just packs him in. He knows that the first game took a little while, and there's actually only 13 minutes left in the round, so they want to make sure they can finish it.
They have a slight time extension for the feature match. They're at 20 minutes.
Okay.
The on-camera clock is correct for the round.
But especially when there's, say, Batter Skull and GTA's running around, the match could take a while. Yeah, the on-camera clock, that's a nice innovation. I didn't have that back in my day. You kids these days with your on-screen clocks and your, fancy blue image things.
Look at all these different boxes that everything's sorted into.
Right. I mean, we had to make do with duct tape. So so they're going back to the sideboards for the 3rd game. Something I'm always curious about that I find really interesting in matches is if the 3rd game will see players sideboard differently. And for example, we could see something like maybe Chris is more interested in Force of Will now that he's on the play and could get some tempo.
You could see some things like Chris has a Spell Pierce in his board. He could, Spell Pierce is live on the play. Not great still. I still don't think I'd want it. Well, but he could Pierce an Ether Vial.
Well, something really interesting about the Spell Pierce actually is he saw a GTA out of Brendan and he played it from his hand, which indicates to Chris there might be more in his deck somewhere. And Spell Pierce to shut off a GTA could be phenomenal. I mean, that could be the game.
You may want it just because you can't let GTA resolve. You actually can't beat the card. So even if you have a terrible answer to GTA, you may board it in. I mean, outside of the Umezawa's GTAs, Chris is probably the favorite in this matchup.
Yeah, so I think I might just bring that Spell Pierce. Plus, you can hit some other cards too, right? You could hit Ether Vial if you're on the play, as you mentioned.
Yeah, it's still pretty dead. It's Ether Vial, you could hit Swords to Plowshares.
Oblivion Ring.
Yeah, if he's brought it in.
But often I like having those one-ofs, or there's a little bit of counter magic after sideboarding like that, just because it gives you a little more flexibility. You can play and craft your game around having that card in your deck.
Mm-hmm.
It's also possible Kira is okay against an active GTA. We could maybe see him bring that Kira. I doubt it, but it's something that you could consider.
It's an interesting idea. Yeah, it does make him slightly more resistant to slightly more game against GT. Not a huge amount though.
Right. I mean, it does help out a little bit against Swords of Plowshares too. Now, granted, Chris hasn't seen a Swords in this matchup, but he probably has to assume Brendan has it in his deck.
Yeah,
Oblivion Ring, not
deck.
so much, but yeah, that's a good question. Heuristic, is it a white deck? Is it Storm combo? All right, well, then it probably has Swords of Plowshares in it. And Echoing Truth is another card that's also a little more serviceable on the play, because when you're on the play in a beatdown mirror match, you can just gain that kind of tempo by playing your stuff early, attacking, bounce their guy.
Well, if you let them equip a GT and then bounce the GT, that's actually enough tempo that could swing the whole game.
Right.
Once Chris has like 3 Lords down, the GT is almost not as scary. You know,
Right.
Then it gives him a chance.
The key is actually getting your Lords above single GTA kill hit range.
Right.
Because if you play 2 Lords and have them both in play, they're both 3/3s, and then suddenly it takes multiple GT counters to get 1 Lord off the board. You have to, have hit twice with GT, get up to 3 counters, and then you can remove it. So that's going to be a pretty important piece, potentially. So yeah, Echoing Truth we can see. All right, so here we go. Off to the races. Chris leads with the Curse Catcher. We see in his hand is Daze, Force of Will, I think Master of the Pearl Trident, and 2 lands. And so
Snap Daze on the other.
yeah,
vial.
so Brendan has the turn 1 vial. Chris happily picks up his island to daze it. So that Curse Catcher is going to get it for 1, dropping Brendan down to 19. And we'll see if we can get a peek on Brendan's hand here. So Brendan seems to have 2 lands, a Swords to Plowshares, and I think maybe he's got a port back there somewhere.
So Chris's hand this time a little light on action. He has a turn 2 Master of the Pearl Trident, but outside of that and the Mutavault and the Curse Catcher are the only creatures he has in his hand. So there is a chance Brendan's porting him right now. A Swords to Plowshares could actually be pretty difficult for his deck right now.
So Chris wastelands away the Rishan Port. Something interesting you saw there is Brendan saw that Chris didn't play a second play on turn 2 because when he picked up the island and replayed it, so Brendan just decided, hey, I'll tap your land so you can't cast anything else. And now Brendan lands a Thalia, which is the 2/1 first striker, which will help protect against that Curse Catcher, and the first Merfolk Lord Chris plays.
Right. So Chris is now. So now we have a draw of Silvergill Adept, which he may have to actually. I believe it was Adept, not Image. No, it was Phantasmal. I think he has both Phantasmal Image and Silvergill Adept. We'll probably see the Adept first because he only has 1 Merfolk card in his hand.
Right. So there's the Silvergill Adept revealing that Master of the Pearl Trident, giving him 2/1 and another card. He draws Dismember, which could be quite crucial here.
Yep.
Although it's worth noting that Thalia will make Dismember cost 1 more to cast, and because of that Thalia, Chris cannot force a will. He can't force a will this turn because he's tapped out.
Yeah, Thalia's still pretty decent here, and it looks like Brendan may have another GT.
Oh dear.
I know, you're like, uh-oh.
All right, so he gets in with the Thalia for 2, and if there's ever time to land a GT, this is it, because Chris can't do a lot about it. Curse Catcher is instant or sorcery, correct?
Oh, there we go. It's instant or sorcery. So, okay, it's Mirren Crusader. I don't actually believe he... I don't think he has a GT. We don't know. We don't know his hand entirely.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's moving his hand pretty fast, but I see a Swords of Plowshares, I think I see a land, and a couple other cards. But so Brennan's board now is Mirren Crusader Thalia, 3 lands, all planes, versus Chris's Curse Catcher Silvergill Adept, 2 islands. Chris's hand looks to be Force of Will, 2 Mutavaults, or no, Mutavault Dismember.
Yeah, Mutavault Dismember, Force of Will,
Daze now,
and Phantasmal Image.
Okay, so if you're Chris here, what do you do? Do you think you go for the Image?
Well, I think you want to make this game last a while right now, because the longer this game goes on, the more favored I think Chris is. As soon as he needs to make sure like Mirren Crusader is stronger than anything Chris has right now, but it won't be in 3 turns. So I'd start with my first Lord. I want the Image to be another Lord if possible.
Yep. I think I agree with you there. I mean, we saw how relevant getting all those Lords active was in the first game, where we just played a bunch of Lords out and they all pumped each other, and you could attack right through that Mirren Crusader.
Exactly.
So I think we'll see him cast the Master of the Pearl Trident here. Especially because he revealed it last turn to the Adept too, so Brendan even knows that he has it. Yeah. And there's the Master. Now Brendan does have a Swords of Plowshares to help tear apart the Merfolk army.
Right, so what Brendan's going to be trying, he's trying to stop this, from Chris from assembling this critical mass of Lords. Brendan really would just like to hit him with Mirren Crusader a couple times.
So there's a Django Castle from Brendan, and that will protect 2 damage to the Thalia if he ever chooses to use it. Now we saw that castle be a bit of a downside in the first game where he got wastelanded, but this game it might turn out to be pretty relevant. Brendan has plenty of lands, and he can prevent some damage to that Thalia if need be.
Yeah, I think the greed in Django Castle and the mana base is pretty justified. There are enough basics and death and taxes that it doesn't even need that many lands to play well. That even when it does get, you sometimes do pay the prices we saw for get wastelanded, but by and large, I think this is it's an acceptable non-basic in the deck.
Right, with both Mangar of Koronor and Thalia, having some protection is pretty useful. So Brennan attacks with both of his creatures. In comes Mirror Crusader, in comes Thalia, and it's going to be on Chris to see if he wants to block or not. If not, it's going to be dropping down to 12.
Yeah, none of these blocks are particularly enticing for Chris. He could trade, he could trade his Master of the Pearl Trident, or think he's trading Master of the Pearl Trident with Silvergill Adept. I'm wondering if that double block did just happen.
All right, so...
It looks like there's swords on Merfolk of the Master of the Pearl Trident. I'm not sure what the block was there.
I don't think I saw a block. Chris is down to 11, so there was no block there. So Chris Force of Wills the sword on his Master.
If he's down to 11, it doesn't really make sense to main phase the Swords to Plowshares there. That gave Chris an extra mana.
Right, I would absolutely have waited and passed the turn. But Brennan opted not to, so Chris is sitting at 11, Brennan at 18. Brennan with that Mirror Crusader and Thalia doing some damage, but Chris is starting to build up his army. He's got a Curse Catcher, Silvergill Adept, and a Master of the Pearl Trident.
Yeah, I mean, we're probably just going to continue to see more Merfolk, more Lords coming down. An image on Master of the Pearl Trident is probably due. He has another Silvergill Adept, but that one's going to cost 5 until Chris draws another
Right,
Merfolk.
no Merfolk. Phantasmal image, while Merfolk often on the battlefield, certainly not a Merfolk in his hand.
Exactly.
So, Chris is tapping 1. I think you might, I don't know, I can't imagine doing anything else but playing that image here.
Yeah, I mean, you could tap 2 to dismember the Thalia. That's really not what you'd want to be doing.
Right. Getting that Thalia, I'm not even that scared of the Thalia. I mean, just like playing another Lord and attacking here, I mean, that's, what, that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points of damage sitting right there.
For a mono blue deck, Merfolk really deals damage in large chunks when it chooses to.
So, yeah, here comes the image. And he's going to probably copy the Master.
Mm-hmm. So we have a 4/4, a 4/3, and a 3/3. So that, yeah, a 3/3, a 4/3, and a 3/3. Yeah, the image is on Master. So yeah, he threatens a swing for 10.
All right, so he's going to serve in for 10 here, and I think you're just getting with everybody if you're Chris. Yep. Yeah, I'll come in. That'll drop Brendan down to a paltry 8 life.
Yeah, and next turn Chris will have the Mutavault to be another Merfolk attacker.
Right. Absolutely.
Brendan's currently, on the wrong side of this race.
No, it would help an Umezawa's GT.
Yeah, it would be great. I mean, you would have double strike as well, so you'd get a lot of GT counters.
Right, so it looks like you drew Aven Mind Sensor. Certainly not the all-star of this matchup.
No, it's one of those cards that, you're really not happy with in the matchup, but, you only have so many things to board in, so it ends up just being something that you're playing.
Right, the Aven Mind Sensor, a 2/1 flash, maybe could slightly throw Chris off his game plan, but... So he draws Caracas there, which... Not a lot that's going to do right now. He can target his own Thalia if he wants to block and save it, but... So Brendan just has to pass the turn, or a little reluctantly there. Now, he does have some okay blocks here. He can block with Mirror Crusader on one of the creatures, and he can block Thalia on the other, and potentially a Giant Go Castle it or Caracas it as necessary. But Brendan is quickly falling behind. Chris is building up his army, and Brendan's going to be in a rough spot.
Chris drew another Lord. This time it was Lord of Atlantis. So he has 2 plays. He can play Lord of Atlantis. He can similarly just activate Mutavault right now, which may even... I mean, I don't believe... It may even be a lethal swing at this point.
I think I would probably just play the Lord of Atlantis and attack, just getting the extra Merfolk Lord on the board. You're popping up 4 Merfolk instead of making one guy bigger. But we'll see. Yep, and there comes the Lord of Atlantis. And now it's going to be time to serve with everybody. We'll see a flash and Aven Mind Sensor here from Brendan to help with blocking, but this combat is not going to be pretty for the mono-white player.
No, there are a lot of the creatures are... There's going to be some chump blocking going on here.
There's going to be some carnage. So Chris is deciding what he wants to attack with. Now, an interesting note is that if Chris doesn't attack with everybody, that's giving Brendan more time to find an answer, and if he finds a GT or something, that could completely turn this game around.
Yeah, I mean, even if he gets the GT right now, and this is kind of a thing where the GT needs to come down before, the second or third Lord. I'm not even positive the GT is enough right now. The first activation kills Phantasmal Image, which is great.
Right. All right, yeah, so I think Chris makes the clear play, attacking with everybody, thinking it through first to make sure, but...
To make sure he's not missing something. But yeah, at this point, each of them is a 4/4.
Right.
The Silvergill Adept's a 5/4. So the swing is for 17 damage.
Yeah, I like the attack, and Chris also has that Dismember in his hand, so while he can't cast it right now because of the Thalia, if Thalia goes away, or even on his next turn, he could just Dismember one of Brendan's creatures and blow him out.
So you cast Aven Mind Sensor, a little bit of a backup. It looked like he was blocking. He had moved to blocks for a second there. But, I mean, both players think that's fine.
Yeah, so
I don't think it really changes things.
All right, so now Brendan's got 3 creatures he can block with, and he has the Django Castle he can activate on that Thalia if he wants to.
Yeah, none of his blocks here, he may want to hope that the Mirran Crusader could actually trade for a card. Mirran Crusader would likely want to go on Master of the Pearl Trident. It's probably the most relevant card. You'd want to kill the actual Master as opposed to killing the image, I would imagine.
Right. The image is going to be a lot easier to kill.
Right. That said, it's not, they're both lords.
Right, but just, a card like Swords of Plowshares doesn't get the life, and Active Jite just kills this guy.
Right.
So we'll see how he chooses to block here, but I think all of these blocks just look terrible for Brendan.
Yeah.
And look at that face right there. That is not the face of someone who is in a comfortable position. All right, back against the wall. Blocking it like this.
Yep, so chump blocks on Silvergo Adept and on Master of the Pearl Trident, a trade with Phantasmal Image. Chris will drop to 4 after the attack.
Right, and there's all the creatures die. It's worth noting that Brendan, if he had left his Caracas untapped, he could have bounced his own Thalia to save it, just have an extra guy, but I don't think it's going to be incredibly relevant at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So Chris,
right.
or Brendan untaps, draws, finds a Mother of Runes, and that's it. And he extends the hand. Chris Morris Lent takes down the match. Look at Chris there, taking a breather. That was a tight match of Magic we just watched occur here at the Star City Games Open Series in Seattle.
All right. So,
and just in time too.
Yeah, just a time. They had a slight time extension, but yeah,
but still,
time just about called
left
in this round. Yeah.
Yeah.
Going all the way to time. That'll move Chris Morris